Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Severance, Season 2, Episode 1, Hello Miss Cobel. The incredible Apple TV Plus series from Ben Stiller and Dan Erickson has returned, starring Adam Scott in this high-concept workplace sci-fi story with deep mysteries around Lumen Industries. While this New Rockstars channel is better known for breaking down comic book movies and shows, Severance is exactly the kind of TV I believe I was designed to unpack, analyze, scrutinize, theorize about, and this second season is already just as mysterious and layered as the first, so we gotta break down this season premiere for all the clues and details you might have missed. And if you don't watch the show, you're missing out, let me tell you. Okay, we opened the second season on black as the voices of Mark, Helly, and Irving cry out in the final few seconds of the override period that ended the thrilling season 1 finale. Mark rushing to find his sister Devon after finding the photo of his supposedly late wife Gemma and realizing that she's the same woman as the wellness director, Ms. Casey, and therefore still alive.
Devon, she's alive! Devon, she's alive!
Then Helly in her Outie form as Helena Egan, heiress to Lumen Industries, speaking before investors who are interested in supporting the severance procedure, and Helly now using that moment to paint the real picture of the innies' suffering.
No. Listen, we're not happy. We're miserable. They torture us down there. We're prisoners! Listen, we're not happy. We're miserable. They torture us down there. We're prisoners!
And Irving pounding on the window of Bert, heartbroken that his crush as an Outie seems to be already in a happy relationship. Hearing these lines again remind us of how season 1 ended, but also the fact that we're hearing the lines over black suggests that these might be echoing somewhere in the void of the subconscious of the Outies, since these screams happened as Mr. Milchick tackled Dylan to cut off the override. In season 1, we learned that the emotional pain of either the innie or the Outie will sometimes carry over in some residual form to the other half on the other side of the switch. So after screaming, "She's alive!" the Outie form of Mark would have felt physiologically his face flushed, his voice hoarse, and emotionally some vague sense of panic and confusion and anger that his Outie would not have known the source of, but a feeling he still would have felt. We flash in on Mark's innie in the elevator, chaotically transitioning and convulsing in a way we don't typically see during this process. It's usually much calmer. This could be because his innie is coming back online after, he'll soon learn, 5 months of dormancy, or at least so he's told. I just assume that it probably was 5 months because that type of stop motion short film cannot be done that fast. As we saw in season 1, cinematographer Jessica Gagne's technique of the Zolly shift comes back here, which was inspired by the dolly zoom of Vertigo and Jaws. But whereas those were used to emphasize the actor's surroundings shifting around them, Gagne used the Sony Venice to shift from a longer lens to a wider lens within the shot to show how the actor's faces morph optically, resulting in the Outie's faces looking more flat and dull, and the innie's faces shifting to look more narrow and pointed toward the camera and hyper-focused. We follow into a full 2-minute tracking shot following Mark's run through the quarters, set to Les McCann's Burnin' Coal. It is 9:05 on the analog clock as he leaves the elevator. Just note that, I'll come back to it. In the very first episode of the series, we followed Mark as peacefully strolling this path on the way to macrodata refinement with the camera rolling in front of him. Now the camera chases him from behind, struggling to keep up. At the moment the override ended, he was also running to get to Devon, so now he's kind of just continuing that sprint to his wife. In season 1, and now, the labyrinthian corridors of the severed floor are not only part of the social experiment and a way to keep the various pods of innies trapped and siloed from each other, mazes in many examples of fiction symbolize the subconscious mind itself and the dangerous path we as human beings are navigating as we walk our way to enlightenment. But if we take the wrong turn, sometimes it can lead to insanity. Mark makes a wrong turn on this run, but really it might just be because muscle memory is taking him unconsciously on his normal routine walk from the elevator to macrodata refinement. And he has rarely, if ever, gone directly from the elevator to the wellness area, so he has to backtrack and remember the alternate route to wellness. And the camera shifts from a mounted situation to handheld as we shift into Mark's point of view, making this part feel like a found footage horror to show that this room that used to be wellness has had its door label recently removed, but we can still make out the letters. And inside, the previous interior has been changed into this awkwardly bisected room with fresh drywall. The handheld camera orbits Mark, and in the creepiest shot of this episode, an out of focus mystery man in a blue suit barely visible in the hallway behind Mark, watching him, steps out of view in slow motion. Whoever or whatever this is, it is wearing the same exact color suit as Mark. So is this Mark himself? Like, is he hallucinating an outer self stalking him? It's definitely not Milchick. I was wondering, is it Mr. Grainer? Is this just a hallucinatory side effect of the override, similar to the hallucinations Petey experienced from his reintegration? Mark returns to the MDR room and finds 3 new employees: Gwendolyn Y, played by Elias Shawkat, Mark W, played by Bob Balaban, and Dario R, played by Stefano Carinante. Right away, we see how these are sort of like bizarro alternates of Helly, Irving, and Dylan. We got a curious hipstery love interest, a rule-following soft-spoken old-timer, and just a fiery wild card. Mark asks,
"Who are you people?"
The opening words we heard over Black in the pilot episode was Mark asking Helly this.
Who are you?
Obviously, identity is one of the key themes of the series. Dario R has this figurine on his desk. A close-up later shows that it's a wooden engraving of his face labeled Dario R and Grimaldi. Perhaps a past bonus for meeting quota, but we should wonder, why is Dario's figurine wooden and hand-carved, whereas Mark's is glass and rotating and lit? Later, Dario claims that his previous branch was crappy, with the statues of the Egans being represented as brooms with paper plates, and that the elevator was a rope. So it makes sense that his reward would also be carved out of wood, and I was wondering that maybe he came from one of the branches in Europe, as we saw in the animated video. Mr. Milchick arrives with some Mark printed balloons, which looks like it's the same shot of Adam Scott smiling as what's on his desk paperweight. This specific shade of blue on the balloons is already everywhere this season, and Mr. Milchick says,
"In a minute."
It's a cruel play on words because while this is a colloquial way of greeting someone you haven't seen for 5 months, from the perspective of Mark's innie, this gap of time really has been just about a minute. The title card of season 2 just shows the word severance white on white, looking like the removed wellness from the wall. Like the word severance was once here, but it was pried off and like moved to a different place. Mr. Milchick guides Mark to the management office, and he claims their override stunt happened 5 months ago and indicates that it brought about necessary change to Lumen.
But we must be cut to heal, mustn't we?
I feel like there's a nod here to the surgical process of severance, like to cut one's conscious mind in half in order to try to heal trauma. But of course, that's not really healing. Like, you don't have to be cut to begin with, right? In the same way that for Mark, getting severed to avoid thinking about his dead wife was not actually processing his trauma. Mark meets Milchick's new deputy manager, Miss Huang, a young girl. Obviously, super creepy that Lumen is able to employ minors in these kinds of roles, but there's a big mystery around Miss Huang. We'll talk about this kid later. In this management office, notice it's 9:15 on the analog clock, and back in MDR, it was exactly 9:10. So we should note that every time up until this point in the episode, we have seen a wall clock in a new location, we have progressed exactly 5 minutes in time. Milchick says that Miss Cobel is no longer with Lumen. She was fired at the end of season 1, but I wondered if her decision to expose the innie's breakout might get her back in Lumen's good graces. Patricia Arquette is still part of the series, and she does appear in different setups in the trailer, so she's gonna have some role in the plot ahead. Milchick shows Mark an obviously fake newspaper, but one that they still blacked out pieces of text of, which is odd since they clearly forged the entire thing. There's so much to break down from this article. Let's take a look. It's the Kier Chronicle, published since 1893, and that year could be a clue. Kier Egan founded Lumen in 1865, the year the Civil War ended, and in 1866, Kier released his first topical salve. Kier ran Lumen until 1939, but 1893 was the year of the Chicago World's Fair, and I wonder if that's when Kier's technologies reached new fame and new funding. And then we see this obviously Photoshop photo of Dylan, Irving, Helly, and Mark in a ticker tape parade, but the 4 of them were clearly just photoshopped from that team photo that Milchick took of them in the office in season 1. And Gina Ippolito figured out that this parade photo was actually Dwight D. Eisenhower visiting Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in February 1960, right after he left office. The caption for this photo is, "Hero Lumen employees were celebrated on Sunday for exposing the nature of severed work." And then the headline, "Innies blow the whistle." And then we see the slug line, Kier PE. Now, we've seen this town labeled as Kier PE before. PE is not the abbreviation of any US state. It's not a reference to Canada's Prince Edward Island province. The town of Kier is a fictional setting, presumably a company town that might have distanced itself from the outside world sometime in the 1930s. Like, we've seen the license plate for Kier before. They carry the motto of Remedium Omnibus, meaning a cure for mankind, and they feature the face of Kier Egan. We also know that Lumen controls controls the media and the newspapers. PE might be Providence or maybe even Principality of Egan. And I say that because we learned later in this episode that there are additional sovereign nations in the world of this show. And one of them, or several of them, could be run by Lumen. And Kier could be within like a sovereign state that's within the territory of the United States. This article reads, less than a week has passed since 4 Lumen workers brought the notion of severance reform to the world's attention, and already the world has come out to say thank you. A celebration was held Sunday, then it is blacked out. In other columns we can read, the board was eager to listen, followed by a list of performers that were blacked out. I'm curious to know who was on the set list. And then a benediction was delivered by Dr. Rickon Hale, author of such hits as The You Are and These Values 9, How I Let Kier In. So all of this was clearly concocted, probably by Milchick, to try to trick Mark by using his brother-in-law's actual book title, but then they added a probably made-up follow-up book that he probably didn't actually write to claim that Rickon might have been converted to Egan's doctrine. And then this article on the left with a blacked-out headline includes a mention of a Baird Creek bandit. Baird Creek is Mark and Miss Selvig's neighborhood, and this bandit has been breaking into houses during work hours, stealing valuables, leaving the hot water running, which I think could be a way of Lumen trying to justify Cobel/Selvig's home break-ins, but leaving the water running, is that a Home Alone Wet Bandits reference? Also, I think I see something about a stolen heirloom belonging to a grandfather, which made me wonder how many generations have lived and worked in the sovereign nation of Kier PE. Milchick snatches a newspaper away before Mark or us can look at it for that long, but Milchick then reminds us of the security doors installed at MDR and Miss Cobel singing that punitive version of the Kier hymn. We saw that in season 1. Now Milchick takes the performative guilt to claim to feel bad for locking Mark in like an animal and say that as an unsevered man, he'll carry that guilt with him forever, trying to make Mark feel better for being severed. Milchick blames everything on Cobel and says that she wanted to engage Mark's innie and outie in a throuple. It seems like that's the way Lumen is playing this, to find one bad apple that they can make the sin eater of the scandal, when really it pointed to a systemic corruption of the company. Milchick claims that Mark's outie begged to come back right away. Yeah, we're still waiting on Mark's outie's point of view in a future episode to know exactly what happened from the party onward. You can kind of look at the trailer for the season and see that at some point Milchick did have a sit down with Mark's outie. We'll see in future episodes. Meanwhile, Mark W and the others talk about their workspace, and Mark W says that their past workspace was puce, not purple, because puce makes him nauseous. And I wonder if the color of the furniture could be part of this general experiment to make him feel unsettled with the numbers on his screen and to inspire one of those 4 tempers that I think the 4 bins that they sort the numbers into are references to. Mark shows Dario the supply closet, and whereas in season 1, this was a whole room that they could go inside of to whisper and gossip, now it is just a shelf, and you can see Mark react like he's ready to walk inside a whole room and surprised that it's not a room anymore. Gwendolyn asks Mark what the sky of the outie world looks like, and she's disappointed that Mark didn't think to look up and was just distracted by a brother-in-law. She also says that 3 of them theorize that they're in Wyoming, and I love how the show always stays ahead of the mysteries by just having the characters ponder the same questions that are in our heads to let the viewers know that the writers do intend on answering these questions at some point. Again, while the location of the town of Kier is a mystery for now, they did shoot the series in New York and in New Jersey. Miss Huang leads them into this icebreaker ball game that Milchick played with them in season 1, but this time it's in the kitchenette. Behind Mark W, you can see a jar filled with tokens for the vending machine. Some viewers questioned what the workers ate every day, and there was a scene showing Dylan with the vending machine token and choosing raisins. This now establishes that there's a big jar of tokens with a limit of probably 1 or 2 per day. Remember, the newspaper article that Milchick showed Mark included a bit about snack upgrades, and they talk about that in the video as well. So these tokens are probably part of that. Another question in the viewers' minds asked in the context here.
Why are you a child?
Because of when I was born.
I mean, really, what Mark W and we are asking is, what the hell? Lumen has child workers now? Remember, the protesters with the flyer in season 1 said that Lumen was testing on children, and this proves it to be true. Now, a theory I discussed on the break room last Friday is that Miss Huang is Gemma and Mark's daughter. Adam Scott is old enough to have a daughter this age. Mark indicated that he and Gemma had trouble conceiving kids, so maybe Lumen was involved with Gemma to do some fertility treatments. Mark also said in the pilot episode that he and Devin's father was an undiagnosed alcoholic, and clearly Mark's outie has a drinking problem. But I wondered if Mark might have been drinking during his and Gemma's marriage, and that led to some problems, and not just drinking after she died. Like, maybe one of the possible selling points of the severance procedure that Lumen is testing out is, can seemingly hereditary diseases like alcoholism be cured by severing one's consciousness from memories and trauma and learned behaviors, and instead just getting down to the innate soul that's there underneath? Like Helena Egan is is a pretty immoral 1%er, but when she gets stripped down to her innie, she's a virtuous rebel. Mark Scout might have, on the outside, been an abusive alcoholic husband in his marriage, but when he's stripped down to the Mark we know, he's an amiable friend. I'm just thinking maybe Gemma worked for Lumen, and she might have used Lumen to hide her child from Mark, and she had Lumen fake her death to get away from Mark, and now part of this test is to see if Mark is a different, kinder man around this girl than he would have been as a father on the outside. The number batching of macrodata refinement could be a test to see whether fears in general come innately from our souls or from external exposures and inspirations. Like Kier Egan would say, all we are really born with are the 4 tempers. Everything else is learned by the outside world. Mark W says that they worked at Branch 5X and thought he'd be permanently retired when his branch shut down. This video is sponsored by Blue Chew. If you spent New Year's Eve watching the ball drop and thinking, I wish that didn't remind me of my wiener, Blue Chew can lift your spirits and a whole lot more besides. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. It's super easy too. Just sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. You can take Blue Chew anytime, day or night. That way you can plan ahead or be ready for whenever an opportunity arises. If you're skeptical or don't think you need it, try it free for a month and see. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at bluechew.com. And we got a special deal for our viewers. Try your first month of Blue Chew free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring our channel. Miss Huang says Mark S is next and rolls the ball to Mark S because the point of the ball game is that each person chooses who goes next by just rolling the ball to whoever. So clearly Miss Huang is running this to put Mark S on the spot here. And Mark flashes to the wedding photo of him and Gemma that he saw, but this insert was shot on a brighter setting than the room in Devon's house that Mark saw it in the season 1 finale. So I don't know if Lumen might have confiscated this frame and moved it somewhere else, or maybe Mark is just disassociating to see this framed photo as being in the room where they are right now. But it's just interesting that he sees this photo right as he looks at the young Miss Huang. I think he is seeing his wife in his mind and his daughter in front of him. He just doesn't know it. Mark tries to play off the moment with a chipper, I made 4 new friends today, which Miss Huang shuts down as just a supervisor, not his friend, leading to this stare down.
3 new friends.
Yeah, Mark clearly has a bit of contempt for whatever Lumen is trying to pull with Miss Huang. Mark goes back into the elevator, Zolly's out to his Outie, and then Zolly's right back into his innie, so really no Outie perspective this episode. We only get a second or two to see Mark's Outie, and he looks, the typical amount of dead-faced. Gwendolyn says that the Egan statues in the perpetuity wing of their former branch all moved like animatronics, doing this little dance, which is some serious Hall of the Presidents / Five Nights at Freddy's freaky shit. From Mark's answer, she assumes that this might be an older branch. Mark slips a handwritten note in Mark W's jacket to try to get Mark W fired, writing it from Mark W's point of view, describing Milkshake as a shambolic rube named Milkshake. But they all see through Mark S's ruse, and Mark W cannot let go of the idea that Mark S wants to be the only Mark. Mark S tricks them into thinking he sabotaged the kitchenette, which would be the most valuable place for innies now because it has all the recent snack upgrades. And he runs back to Milkshake's office. In this drawer, there's this tube. This translates to new Kynar. It's for cuts and bruises during pruning. And it seems to be paste for the bonsai tree pruning. According to editor Joshua, it's $12 on Amazon. Mark uses a speaker to contact the board and appeals to them, trying to do the right thing for severed people. And I really just think any Mark is being genuine here. He doesn't mind his life on the severed floor. He just wants to be with his squad. Milkshake leads Mark to the elevator, and Mark zollies in and out again, and his eyes flutter like they did at the top of the episode, and he blacks out, which is normally not part of this daily transition. So this indicates some kind of extra reboot has happened. Now, when the elevator doors open, there's a frightening portrait called Kier Pardons His Betrayers. Remember, Lumen was founded in 1865, so this shows Kier Egan in a Union soldier uniform with a sword, holding the face of, it looks like 3 men, and that might be 1 woman there, like the 4 people who work in MDR. They're buried to their chests. An older Lumen factory towers behind them. This is the kind of aesthetic optics and design go for, with the symbolism pretty straightforward. Rebel against us, and you'll be treated the way Union soldiers treated Confederates. Dylan returns, and it seems like it's shortly after Milkshake tackled him. He recalls his favorite belt being cut up. Next in the elevator is Irving, who's still pounding on the windows, but screaming, Bert. All of this, by the way, is another several minute long take as the camera just kind of twists around the lobby area as more of them arrive. Mark prays that the elevator dings the 4th time, and it does. And what we think is Helly runs out.
Helly! Oh my God, are you okay?
Aha! Right away, we can tell something is up because Helly is slow to hug Mark back, and she's kind of taken aback and put off, which is very out of character for the Helly we knew because the last time Helly saw Mark was right here, and they were kissing. So we already know that this isn't the any Helly, this is the Outie, the evil corporate-minded Helena Egan, posing as her any self as, I suppose, a willing spy for Lumen to infiltrate these rebellious innies. A wealthy heiress like Helena isn't used to normal people running up to hug her, but she otherwise plays the part. Sociopathically perfect in this episode. Oh, I hate it. I just want to know where our Helly is. Free Helly. As soon as Mark says, what if they're listening, Helly draws attention to the fact that the security cameras are gone. Helena is again playing the part too, trying to look just as paranoid and freaked out as the others. Miss Huang leads them to the break room where Milkshake is waiting. We can see some great posters on the wall of this cramped room. There's I'm a Frolic-aholic with a worker drinking with a court jester. Reminder that Frolic is one of the four tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. And like Mark's alcoholism, Egan would say frolic is a natural vice that the Egans believe is in our innate souls. Hang in there with a man holding himself between two purple walls pressing in on him. Be ever merry with Kier Egan's face on a worker bee and the Lumen water drop logo as drops of honey. And another poster, Grin and Baird It. Remember, Baird Egan was the fourth CEO of Lumen, who ran the company from 1959 to 1976, and Mark's neighborhood, Baird Creek, was named after him. And then later after the video, I don't know what this is, but there's a weird floor lamp shaped like a yellow balloon that doesn't seem to be contributing any light. Okay, so Milkshake boots up this amazing industrial welcome video for all future innies, and it's titled Lumen is Listening, which comes off like a Big Brother threat, but I'm also getting vibes of we hear you and we here for you as like that empathetic turned creepy corporate slogan that we saw in Succession. Kier Egan soars in from the heavens. Remember when Helly completed her number sorting in season 1, her computer screen showed that animation of Kier Egan standing atop Mount Everest and flying away. I love that they just think Kier Egan can fly. This stop motion is done in the style of Rankin Bass claymation films. I love it. Now the building talks to us.
You probably don't recognize me from this angle.
So this is the voice of Keanu Reeves, and it is great. This building layout is not exactly the layout of the campus in Kier PE, but maybe Branch 501 is another location, or maybe we are just seeing it from the backside. He shows different phases of the location over the years, saying he's gone through a lot of changes since my siring here in 1870. Siring? Ugh! This also tells us a bit more about the Lumen timeline. The company was founded in 1865, but this location was built 5 years later in 1870. In the second era of the plant, notice the sign on the right, Lumen Industries, shows the water drop logo was originally a tonic bottle, showing how the company was founded on con man snake oil remedies. In the Lumen lobby, the Kier face winks, and we see how there are as many unsevered workers on the upper floors as severed ones down below. We didn't see that many upstairs employees in season 1. It was often empty, but they did shoot season 1 during COVID. Keanu's voice brags that Lumen has locations in over 206 countries. Now, what's weird about that is in our world, there are only 195 recognized countries by the UN. So I think we're looking at a future with additional countries, or maybe Lumen is a mega corporation that has 11 or more sovereign principalities that don't fall under US law. PE could be one of those. Like maybe the Principality of Egan is just like some land that was carved out of the American West. This clay globe of North America, though it may not be accurate to Lumen's actual site map, shows lights all around the world, but in North America, we see lights for locations around Philadelphia, Nashville, I want to say somewhere in South Dakota, maybe like Denver or Salt Lake City, Phoenix, and I think that would be like Spokane, Washington. You can also see lights in Mexico City and the northern territories of Canada. There's also one in the South Pacific. The employee that the wall yells at for running kind of looks like Ben Stiller, the executive producer of the show. And then Keanu talks about the Macrodat Uprising is what they call it. And we see animated forms of the four of them. Notice that it doesn't depict exactly how things went down, showing Mark and Helly in the room when Dylan was the one who was there. And I think this is designed to drive a wedge between Dylan and the others because Dylan is eager for credit in his role. They repurpose audio that we heard these innies say throughout season 1, from Irving saying, "Let's burn this place to the ground," now rendered as a fiery wild dance to Mark's speech in O&D. This specific visual of Irving with flames on his head is a reference to the Heat Miser from the Rankin Bass 1974, A Year Without Santa Claus. Dylan and Irving learn that Mark and Helly kissed before the override incident, and the audio sounds pretty low quality, sounding like it might be coming from mics that were around the office or maybe hidden on the persons. There's a blueprint for Lumen Candy Christmas mints, which the stop motion version of Dylan guzzles down and gives him a high, and Dylan takes offense to this. In addition to these perks of new snacks, we also learn that they'll be getting hall passes and then pineapple bobbing, which seems painful. Like the stop motion Helly gets one and her eyes bulge out in pain briefly. Also, we learn of a mirror room, which seems not at all fun, and maybe a new break room approach to torturing misbehaving workers. And then back to the Branch 501 campus, we see 2 rabbits hopping out front. Also drinking from the pond is a reindeer, which definitely keeps up with the Rankin Bass theme, because I think that might even be the same design for the stop motion figurine used in those films. The flying Kier Egan flies past a water tower.
They made quite a splash!
This is the voice of Sarah Sherman from Saturday Night Live. Forcing the 4 of them to watch this suspicious video is, I think, a structural device that we saw in this show's spiritual ancestor, Lost. Season 2 of that series also began with the regulars thinking they were committing some revolutionary breakthrough act, busting open the hatch and going down into it. But then in season 2, they find themselves on an even more mind-numbing task, going back down a pipe, now having to just enter numbers on a computer terminal, which has always been very similar to the seemingly random task of the innies on this show, batching numbers on a screen. And then Lost Season 2, Episode 1 showed them a creepy industrial video for the Dharma Initiative hosted by Dr. Marvin Candle or Dr. Pierre Chang. And as with that video in Lost, I think this video was designed specifically for these watchers to try to control them. Milchick claims that at the end of the day, they will all be allowed to either leave or stay and effectively have the option to end their lives as they know it. As with any Helly in season 1, it's probably a false choice. Milchick claims that, like the rest of the severed floor, the break room has no microphones or cameras, but they also just watched a video that used recordings of what they thought were private moments on the severed floor in season 1. So of course they can't trust him. Mark relays what he learned from the party in season 1, episode 9, including the fact that Miss Casey and Gemma are the same person. But then Mark asks what Helly saw, and Helena Egan lies.
Inside of a really boring apartment.
The camera slides past the back of Mark's head, underscoring Helena's deceit here. Dylan asks follow-ups about what shirt she was wearing, and Helena defaults to save the gorillas, which is a pretty unimaginative ad-lib from this 1%er trying to sound cool, average, and likable. She says she found a gardener outside, and Irving even seems to suspect that, because why would there be a gardener outside at night during winter? But also, gardener, think about it, would also be one of the few average working types Helena Egan would ever interact with in her day-to-day life. Like, she can't conceive of going outside of an apartment and interacting with, a neighbor. Someone that rich doesn't know what a neighbor is. They grow up on massive estates and compounds and never have to go next door and ask for sugar. Irving is too upset over Bert to open up about his time outside, and when he walks off, Helena even says, "We should all go." And Helly R would have been empathetic enough to let Irving have his moment. Helena wants to have all the intel and everyone and anyone Irving might have talked to while he was up there. Helena asks Mark if he and Gemma looked happy in the wedding photo. She looks a little sad. It was Helly who had feelings for Mark, not Helena. So this makes me wonder, is Helena in an unhappy marriage of her own? Helena says,
Though technically, strictly speaking, she's not your wife.
If my theory about Gemma and Lumen is right, maybe this is kind of Lumen stating that Gemma and Gemma's daughter are Lumen property. She also lets her anti-Innie sentiment really show here.
Is that what it is? Mushy?
Helly.
We're not the same, actually.
Yeah, Helena really despises her rebellious Innie, and then she offers to stay, which really is mostly to incentivize Mark to stay longer and to justify why Helly would stay, when in reality, the real Helly R would jump at any chance to leave and to end that life. We get this beautiful scene between Irving and Dylan where Irving wants to end that life, and Dylan will not let him.
I want the pain to be over. I don't want that, because I would be sad.
We all know what the scene is really about, and I just think it's such a great analog of how to break that kind of mental cycle, to try to convince a loved one that you're not just living for yourself. We are all living for other people who love us. Irving tells Dylan how his Outie painted the hallway to that extra elevator with the red down arrow that we saw Miss Casey, Gemma, going down after she got fired. We still have a lot of questions about where this leads or what's beneath the severed floor, but why did Irving's Outie paint this? A theory I pitched on the break room is that maybe senior severed people who have been severed for many, many years, especially ones with artistic souls, like what Irving has, by their natures might just be more connected to their subconscious and can, over the years, begin to heal that sever, to at least dream about experiences from their unconscious selves. Milchick is frustrated that his computer screen still reads, "Hello, Miss Cobel," which is the title of this episode. This makes me think that Cobel hasn't really left Lumen fully, and people don't plan on him being in this office for that long, but this also might be a program to empower Milchick to be a more assertive manager. Milchick tells Dylan that his wife's name is Gretchen and shows him a blueprint of an Outie Family Visitation Suite, which looks like a new way for innies who know they have families to be able to have visits with those families so they don't worry about them and fixate on them all day. This is an additionally cruel twist because it tells that Outie Dylan and his wife and his family benefit from that innie staying imprisoned and that they are all collectively okay with participating in keeping one half of daddy happy in the zoo. The text in the bottom right calls this a relic of less evolved something, which suggests that workers who worry about their families might be less enlightened in some way. In the lower left, it reads that the blueprint represents revision 12 through 100. So Dylan might not be the first or only person they've had this issue with, and they've tweaked a lot of this. Maybe they've had several versions of Dylan and Mark awaken after that incident, and they've had several chances to revise exactly what had manipulated Dylan here. We see how young Miss Huang has her own game at her terminal of dropping circles into little silos, but then from her drawer, she picks up an analog toy showing Kier Egan in an old-timey diving suit where he tried to float rings up onto his hands. Now you'll notice the rings on the game that Miss Huang plays are red and blue and green, the same colors of the 3 projector lights in the break room and the same 3 colors on the packages of the reams of paper in the supply closet. Is it a coincidence? Maybe, but RGB is also the 3 colors of light used in older model display screens, and the monitors that they have for their computers do shift into that 16-bit animation that we saw of Kier Egan flying to Mount Everest, and I feel like they may be using the same color scheme. So Mark returns to his MDR room, and we see Helena knows where the power switch on her computer is. And this is another clue, because Helly R would not be able to find that switch before and never really knew where it was. The outro music of this episode is the Allergies God Walk Down. It plays as Mark returns to his routine of batching, a reminder that on all these keyboards there is no escape key, because there's no escape from this floor. We get a quick look at the new files that flip through on Helly's computer, and the last one of them is Santa Mira, which is the name of the fictional setting in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We could look at this as Helena Egan hijacking the guise of her innie, Helly R, which would be a bit of irony considering this body is, at the end of the day, Helena's body. Or you could look at this as a clue to what might be the master plan of Lumen Industries. Talk about that in a second. But also, Mark's new file is Cold Harbor, which could be a reference to the Battle of Cold Harbor from the American Civil War in 1864. And it's significant for at least 4 reasons. 1, it reminds us of the painting Kier pardons his betrayers that Dylan saw before, and how Kier was dressed as a Union soldier, and we know that he started Lumen in 1865. 2, Mark's previous job was a history professor. 3, Cold Harbor was considered the last major victory for the Confederate units that were led by Robert E. Lee against Ulysses S. Grant's Union forces. And 4, this battle is remembered as one of the highest casualty counts of the Civil War, with somewhere between 10,000 to 13,000 Union soldiers lost. And some historians frame it as an example of Grant's disregard of sacrificing his own men. Maybe there's something there going on with the way Lumen disregards human lives and is okay with just throwing body after body after body in the pursuit of their cause. As Mark batches more and more numbers, we see a screen flashing to track his progress, stats tracking things like duration around 25 minutes. Again, this episode is really good of keeping up real time, so he's been in this sorting session for 25 minutes. Now, the number at the top of this shot shows MP400263. Seems to be using a similar number code as we saw on Helena's Severance chip serial number when it was unpackaged in season 1. That was 400281305. These numbers are for Cold Harbor, and we realize Cold Harbor is code for Mark's wife, Gemma, Miss Casey. And I'll leave you with this observation that actually came from Redditor Phil Gates. They pointed out that the circles we see on the screen represent an electron microscopy image of axons, which are the connections between neurons. It's how neurons, brain cells, communicate with each other. And you would only see them like this, static like this, when the tissue is dead. So I think it's fair to say Gemma might be dead, but a form of her was resurrected after the car crash. Lumen's overall mission might be to learn how to resurrect the dead, specifically to resurrect the original Kier Egan. Batching of the numbers into the 4 boxes could represent the 4 tempers of everyone's soul before it gets affected by the outside world and external societal influences. And then the severed person's goals at macrodata refinement could be to bundle these around just their own natural innate stress emotions, how they view the world without being affected by whatever the modern social ills are, an attempt to give this resurrected Kier Egan the purest possible soul. They might be trying to bolster whatever they have on record for Kier Egan through whatever whatever their evolving technology was from the 19th century. And Lumen might have already been trying to do it in every one of Kier's descendants to varying degrees of success from each of the different CEOs of Lumen. That could be what Helena's father, James Egan, who's the current CEO, was talking about when he called his death the revolving. We are looking at reincarnation of Kier Egan's original soul in each of his descendants. James and Helena are all part of that continuing strain of Kier Egan's identity living on through his descendants. You know, like the way Guinness supposedly keeps the original strain of their yeast. Like old organizations love to mythologize that. This company's goal could be trying to distill it to perfection and master the alchemy of immortality. So many questions about this series, and I love it so much. Comment down below with all of your thoughts and theories. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all 3 channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.